He wasn't insulting your father, Mr. Khalil. He was warning you about the man standing beside you. The words floated across the dining room so softly that, for a heartbeat, they almost disappeared beneath the mellow notes of a jazz trio and the quiet clink of crystal glasses. Then everything stopped. Adrian Khalil's hand froze only inches from the polished walnut door of the Halston room, Manhattan's newest destination for billion-dollar dinners and whispered negotiations. The conversation behind him vanished into an uneasy silence. Even the waitstaff instinctively paused in place, as though the entire restaurant had forgotten how to breathe. Adrian slowly turned his head, his sharp gray eyes searching for the voice bold enough to interrupt him at the exact moment he had decided to walk away from a $2 for billion international partnership. Standing beside a small service station, wearing a pressed black uniform and a silver name tag that simply read Maya, was a young black waitress holding a porcelain coffee cup with both hands. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't trying to draw attention. If anything, she looked like someone who wished she had remained invisible. Yet she had just spoken flawless Arabic to one of the most influential Arab-American CEOs in the country. Claire Whitmore, Adrian's communications director, stared at Maya in disbelief before forcing a polite smile that barely hid her irritation. "Sir," she said carefully, "she's only one of the servers." Maya lowered her eyes for a moment, but didn't apologize. Adrian studied her face without saying a word. The confidence he had built over 2 decades of boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions told him no waitress belonged in a conversation like this. Yet something about the way she pronounced every syllable lingered in his mind. It wasn't textbook Arabic. It wasn't memorized. It carried the rhythm of someone who understood far more than vocabulary. Around them, executives shifted uncomfortably in tailored suits worth more than most monthly mortgages. Investors exchanged puzzled glances. The restaurant manager, Ethan Cole, hurried toward Maya, his heartbeat louder than his polished dress shoes against the marble floor. "Maya," he whispered through a forced smile, "please return to the kitchen." She didn't move. Adrian's phone still rested in his hand, its screen glowing with the unfinished video call that had triggered his anger only seconds earlier. On the other side of the world, someone was still waiting for his answer. The answer that would either preserve years of trust or destroy them forever. Adrian looked back at Maya, his expression colder now, measuring her with the same precision he used to evaluate companies before acquiring them. "You understood that conversation?" he finally asked in English. Maya met his eyes for the first time. Calm, respectful, unafraid. "Every word, sir," she answered quietly. Another silence swept across the room, heavier than the first. Adrian had spent his entire career believing power belonged to the loudest voice at the table. But at that moment, every powerful person in the room found themselves waiting for the next sentence from the one woman none of them had noticed until now. 45 minutes earlier, the Halston room had looked exactly the way every luxury magazine promised New York should look after sunset. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected thousands of city lights across the Hudson River. Soft amber chandeliers painted warm circles over white linen tables. Conversations drifted through the room with practiced confidence, never too loud, never too quiet. Every reservation carried influence instead of names. Every smile seemed carefully negotiated. Maya Brooks stepped through the employee entrance with her dark hair neatly tied back, her uniform perfectly pressed, and the same quiet determination she carried into every evening shift. Less than an hour earlier, she had been sitting beside her mother at Bellevue Hospital, listening to another doctor explain another treatment plan filled with cautious optimism and expensive numbers. She kissed her mother's forehead, promised she would come back after work, then boarded the subway downtown without allowing herself enough time to think about the bills waiting on her kitchen table. By the time she reached the restaurant, she had already decided that tonight would be no different from hundreds of other nights. Smile. Listen. Work hard. Stay invisible. Ethan Cole barely looked up from his clipboard when she checked in. "Private executive event," he said while scanning the seating chart. "International clients. No unnecessary conversations. If they need something complicated, call me." Maya nodded politely. She had heard the same instructions dozens of times. To Ethan, she was dependable, punctual, and forgettable, which was exactly how he preferred his servers. Claire Whitmore arrived minutes later with 2 assistants carrying folders, tablets, and schedules. She walked through the dining room like someone inspecting a theater before opening night. When she noticed Maya arranging crystal glasses, she paused only long enough to ask Ethan, "Do we have someone with experience serving Middle Eastern delegations?" Ethan answered before Maya could speak, "We have everything under control." Claire gave Maya a quick glance that lasted no longer than a second before continuing toward the private dining room. The message was perfectly clear. Maya belonged near the coffee station, not near billion-dollar conversations. She simply continued polishing silverware without reacting. Years earlier, she might have felt offended. Experience had taught her that dignity often spoke loudest through patience. As the guests began arriving, expensive watches caught the light every time another handshake sealed another promise. Lawyers discussed regulations. Investors debated shipping routes. Technology executives compared market forecasts. Maya moved quietly between tables, refilling water glasses before anyone asked, noticing details most people overlooked because that was what good servers learned to do. They listened without appearing to listen. They observed without becoming part of the room. Then Adrian Khalil entered surrounded by advisors, security personnel, and quiet expectation. Every conversation seemed to soften as he crossed the dining room. He acknowledged no spectacle, only purpose. Maya recognized him immediately from business magazines stacked in hospital waiting rooms. She also noticed something almost no one else did. Adrian looked exhausted. His smile never reached his eyes. His shoulders carried the weight of someone who had not truly rested in weeks. As he settled into the private room, a secure video conference connected him with executives overseas. Maya happened to be replacing a coffee service near the doorway when the Arabic voices began flowing naturally through the speaker. She did not intend to listen. She simply understood every word. At first, the discussion sounded respectful, cautious, and productive. Then one sentence arrived that made her slowly stop pouring the coffee. A translator repeated the message in English, but something was wrong. One important expression had been changed. One cultural meaning had disappeared completely. Maya lowered the coffee pot onto its silver tray, her heartbeat quickening as she realized a single mistranslated phrase was quietly steering everyone in the room toward a disastrous misunderstanding. Adrian Khalil had built Khalil Meridian Group on one principle that every executive inside his company knew by heart. Speed defeated hesitation. Opportunities disappeared the moment doubt entered the room. That philosophy had transformed a regional logistics company into one of the largest transportation and energy networks in the world, connecting ports, warehouses, and supply chains across 3 continents. Financial magazines praised his discipline. Competitors respected his instincts. Employees admired his relentless standards, even when they struggled to keep pace with them. Yet there was one part of Adrian that no annual report could ever explain. Family was not a chapter in his life. It was the foundation beneath everything he had built. His late father, Samir Khalil, had arrived in the United States with little more than determination, a borrowed suitcase, and a belief that reputation could outlast fortune. Growing up, Adrian heard the same lesson repeated at nearly every dinner. Money could be earned again. Trust could not. Those words shaped every negotiation he ever entered. Around the polished conference table inside the private dining room, executives exchanged market projections while Adrian listened with calm precision. Across the encrypted video connection, Omar Haddad appeared from Dubai, speaking with the measured confidence of a man who had spent years building a partnership based on mutual respect rather than quick profits. Their companies had spent nearly 18 months preparing this agreement. Together, they could expand shipping routes across the Middle East and North America, creating thousands of new jobs while strengthening trade between both regions. The numbers were impressive, but Adrian valued something else even more. Omar had earned his trust. At least that was what Adrian believed until tonight. Standing beside Adrian, legal advisor Victor Hale adjusted his glasses while quietly monitoring both the Arabic conversation and the English interpretation displayed on a secure tablet. Victor had worked beside Adrian for almost 7 years. He attended board meetings, reviewed acquisitions, and protected the company through countless negotiations. No one questioned his loyalty because no one had ever been given a reason to. As Omar continued speaking, Victor occasionally leaned closer, offering brief explanations whenever cultural expressions appeared. Adrian accepted every clarification without hesitation. Why would he not? Victor had always positioned himself as the bridge between language and business. Then the atmosphere shifted. Omar mentioned Samir Khalil by name before continuing with a longer sentence spoken in careful Arabic. Maya, still arranging coffee service outside the partially open doorway, immediately recognized the expression. It was an old phrase often used throughout Lebanon to honor someone's legacy while warning others not to misuse it. It carried respect, caution, and admiration all at once. Victor looked down at his tablet before calmly translating. He says your father's name has become a symbol that dishonest people continue to exploit. They believe your company may be repeating those same mistakes. Adrian's expression changed almost instantly. The warmth disappeared from his face. Omar kept speaking, his tone steady and respectful, unaware that his message had already begun changing shape inside the room. Maya's fingers tightened slightly around the silver coffee pot. That was not what Omar had said. Not even close. The original words praised Samir Khalil's integrity while warning Adrian that someone close to the negotiations might be abusing his father's reputation for personal gain. The meaning had not merely been softened or simplified. It had been redirected. Maya looked toward Ethan, wondering whether she should quietly mention the mistake. Before she could move, she noticed Victor glance toward Adrian once more and add one final sentence in a calm voice. I believe they are questioning your family's judgment, sir. The room suddenly felt several degrees colder, and Maya realized that one false translation was quietly pushing two trusted partners toward a decision neither of them truly intended to make. Maya stood perfectly still beside the coffee station, but her thoughts raced faster than the traffic outside on Fifth Avenue. She had spent years reminding herself that a waitress was paid to serve meals, not opinions. Customers came for quiet efficiency, not unexpected interruptions. One careless sentence could cost her the job she depended on to pay hospital bills, rent, and every prescription waiting for her mother each month. Yet every instinct she trusted told her that remaining silent would cost someone else far more. Inside the private dining room, Omar Haddad continued speaking with the same calm professionalism he had shown since the meeting began. His expression remained open, respectful, almost puzzled by the sudden change he noticed in Adrian's face. He had no idea that his carefully chosen words were arriving in New York as something entirely different. Adrian leaned back slowly in his chair. The warmth that had filled the first half of the meeting disappeared behind the controlled expression that had made him famous in boardrooms around the world. He folded his hands together, listening as Victor calmly summarized another portion of the conversation. Once again, Maya caught another subtle distortion. Another phrase rooted in honor became a suggestion of criticism. Another respectful warning became an accusation. None of the changes sounded dramatic by themselves. Each one was small enough to escape notice. Together, however, they quietly transformed trust into suspicion. Claire noticed Adrian's silence and slid a folder toward him. If their position has changed this much, she said carefully, perhaps we should reconsider signing tonight. Adrian did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the screen, where Omar waited patiently for a response. The silence stretched across the room until it became heavier than any argument could have been. Maya glanced toward Ethan, hoping for some sign that someone else had recognized the growing misunderstanding. Ethan simply continued arranging dessert menus, completely unaware that the conversation was slipping toward disaster one translated sentence at a time. Maya lowered her eyes and whispered the original Arabic phrase to herself, making certain she had heard it correctly. She knew she had. The expression Omar used was one her late father had once written inside an old notebook she still kept at home. During his humanitarian work overseas, he had filled journals with cultural notes, sayings, and handwritten conversations from families who had welcomed him into their homes. After his passing, one of his closest Lebanese friends had continued teaching Maya not only the language, but also the values hidden inside its expressions. Words were never just words, he often reminded her. In every culture, meaning lived between the sentences. That lesson echoed in her mind as Adrian slowly pushed his chair away from the table. The soft sound of polished wood sliding across the floor immediately drew every eye in the room. Claire straightened her posture. Victor quietly closed his tablet. Omar leaned slightly toward his camera, clearly sensing that something unexpected had changed. Adrian stood with the controlled composure of a man who had already reached his decision. "Please thank Mr. Haddad for his time," he said to Victor. "Tell him Khalil Meridian will not continue negotiations under these circumstances." Victor nodded almost too quickly before translating Adrian's decision. Omar's face filled with visible confusion. He immediately responded in Arabic, speaking faster now, trying to understand what had gone wrong. Maya caught every word. He was not defending himself. He was asking why Adrian believed something that had never been said. Adrian picked up his suit jacket without looking back at the screen. He took one measured step toward the dining room exit, convinced that preserving his father's honor required walking away. Maya watched him approach the doorway, knowing that with every step he moved farther from the truth, and she realized that if she remained silent for even a few more seconds, no one else in the room ever would. Maya set the coffee cup down so gently that it made almost no sound at all. "Mr. Khalil," she said, her voice calm but unmistakably clear, "please do not leave yet." Adrian stopped without turning around. Ethan's face immediately lost its color. "Maya," he whispered urgently, "that is enough." Claire folded her arms, already expecting security to escort the waitress away before another word could be spoken. Victor remained unusually still, although the corner of his jaw tightened for the first time that evening. Adrian slowly turned back toward the room, his expression unreadable. "This meeting is over," he said firmly. Maya met his eyes with complete respect. "Sir, I understand why you believe that. But I do not believe Mr. Haddad said what you were told he said." The room fell silent once again. Nobody reached for a glass. Nobody looked at a phone. Even the musicians outside the private dining room seemed to sense the unusual stillness drifting through the restaurant. Claire took one step forward. "With respect, she is one of the servers. She cannot possibly know the context of an international negotiation." Maya nodded politely. "You are right, ma'am. I do not know every detail of your agreement, but I do know Arabic." Victor finally smiled, although it carried little warmth. "Many people learn a few phrases before traveling," he replied evenly. "Diplomatic language is considerably more complicated." Maya did not react to the remark. Instead, she turned toward the large display where Omar Haddad still waited, looking increasingly confused by the delay. Then, in smooth Lebanese Arabic, she greeted him with a level of fluency that instantly changed the atmosphere inside the room. Omar's tired expression brightened with visible surprise. He answered immediately, no longer speaking slowly for the benefit of a translator, but naturally, comfortably, like someone speaking with an old colleague. Maya apologized for the interruption before asking a single respectful question about the expression he had used regarding Samir Khalil. Omar answered without hesitation. As he explained the meaning, Maya listened carefully, then translated into English without raising her voice. "He said your father's integrity has become so respected that dishonest people sometimes try to hide behind his good name. He was warning you to be careful because someone close to these negotiations may be doing exactly that. He was honoring your father, not criticizing him." Adrian's eyes shifted toward Victor almost instinctively. Victor spoke immediately. "That interpretation is overly literal. Cultural nuance often requires adaptation." Maya gently shook her head. "No, sir. Cultural nuance is exactly why the meaning cannot be changed. In Arabic, that expression praises the person being mentioned. It does not accuse them." Omar nodded repeatedly through the screen before speaking another sentence. Maya translated once more. "He says he has admired your father's reputation for many years and would never disrespect his memory." Adrian remained completely silent. Claire slowly lowered the folder she had been holding. Ethan stared at Maya as though he had never truly seen her before. Victor reached for his tablet again, but his movements were noticeably slower now. Adrian looked back toward Maya. "How long have you studied Arabic?" he asked quietly. Maya answered with the same calm honesty she had shown from the beginning. "Long enough to know when respect has been mistaken for insult, sir." For several seconds no one said another word. The authority that had dominated the room all evening had quietly shifted without anyone raising a voice. A waitress who had entered the night expecting to refill coffee cups had become the only person standing between a lifelong partnership and a misunderstanding worth billions of dollars. Maya could feel every eye in the room resting on her, but she refused to mistake attention for importance. She had not spoken because she wanted recognition. She had spoken because the truth deserved a voice before a decision became permanent. Adrian remained standing for another long moment before slowly returning to his chair. He placed his jacket across the backrest without taking his eyes off Maya. "Tell me something," he said calmly. "Where did you learn Arabic?" Maya hesitated, not because she wanted to hide the answer, but because the story had never belonged in rooms like this. "My father worked with humanitarian organizations overseas for several years," she replied. "After he passed away, one of his closest friends from Beirut stayed in touch with our family. Professor Elias Rahman. He believed language was more than grammar. He believed it was respect. He taught me every Saturday from the time I was 12 years old." Omar smiled warmly from the screen the moment he heard the professor's name. "Elias Rahman?" he asked in Arabic. "The linguistics professor?" Maya nodded with a quiet smile. "Yes, sir." Omar laughed softly, the first genuine laugh anyone had heard all evening. "Half the diplomats I know learned from him. He was famous for telling students that dictionaries explain words, but families explain meaning." Adrian listened without interrupting. Claire slowly lowered herself into her chair again, while Ethan stood frozen beside the doorway, trying to reconcile the quiet waitress he had scheduled for coffee service with the woman now discussing one of the Middle East's most respected language scholars. Maya continued speaking only because Adrian had asked. "Professor Rahman invited my mother and me to family dinners almost every weekend. They corrected my pronunciation every time I made a mistake. They explained history, traditions, poetry, and expressions that cannot be translated word for word. They never treated me like an outsider. They treated me like family." She paused briefly before adding, "Later, I earned a scholarship to study international relations at Columbia University. I completed 3 years before my mother's illness forced me to leave school and work full-time." Ethan blinked in disbelief. "You studied at Columbia?" Maya nodded. "I hope to finish someday." There was no bitterness in her voice, only quiet determination. Adrian folded his hands together as though every answer had created another question. "Why did you never mention any of this?" Maya looked around the elegant dining room before answering honestly. "Because no guest has ever asked what I studied. They usually ask whether I can refill their coffee." The sentence landed gently, yet no one escaped its meaning. Claire looked down at the polished table. Ethan quietly removed his name badge from his jacket pocket, turning it over in his hand without realizing he was doing it. Omar spoke again in Arabic, his tone sincere. Maya translated with the same steady rhythm. "He says Professor Rahman would be proud that his student protected understanding instead of pride." Adrian looked toward the video screen, then back to Maya. For the first time that evening, the distance between a billionaire executive and a waitress seemed smaller than the distance between assumption and truth. Yet as Victor quietly unlocked his tablet once more, Maya noticed something everyone else missed. His fingers moved quickly across the screen before he angled it away from the table. It lasted less than 2 seconds, but it was enough for her to glimpse 2 versions of the same translated transcript displayed side by side. One document matched Omar's words. The other matched what Adrian had been hearing all evening. Maya's heartbeat quickened. The misunderstanding had not happened by accident. Someone had prepared it. Maya kept her eyes on Victor's tablet without allowing her expression to change. Years of balancing trays through crowded dining rooms had taught her that people revealed the most when they believed no one was paying attention. Victor quickly locked the screen and looked up with his familiar professional smile, but it arrived a fraction of a second too late. Adrian noticed the brief hesitation as well. "Is something wrong?" he asked. Victor answered immediately. "Nothing at all. I was organizing the meeting notes." Maya took a slow breath before speaking. "Mr. Khalil, may I ask one question?" Adrian nodded. "Go ahead." She looked toward Victor, then back at Adrian. "Would it be possible to compare the original Arabic transcript with the English version that has been translated tonight?" The room became still once again. Claire looked from Maya to Victor, sensing that the conversation had quietly crossed into dangerous territory. Victor gave a polite laugh. "That would not be necessary. Live interpretation is never word for word." Maya agreed with a respectful nod. "That is true. It should never be word for word, but it should always remain faithful to the speaker's intent." Omar leaned closer to his camera. Speaking in Arabic, he offered to send the original transcript directly from his secure conference system. Adrian looked at Victor. "Can we compare them?" Victor hesitated for the first time all evening. The secure platform may require several minutes. Before he finished speaking, Omar smiled gently. I have already sent the file to your encrypted inbox. Adrian's phone vibrated on the table. He picked it up and saw the notification waiting for him. Without saying a word, he forwarded the document to Claire. Please open both versions, he instructed. Claire placed her tablet beside Victor's translation and carefully aligned the two documents. At first glance, they looked nearly identical. Paragraph after paragraph appeared unchanged. Then Maya quietly pointed to a single sentence halfway down the page. Please read this line aloud. Claire did exactly that. The Arabic text praised Samir Khalil's honesty and warned that someone might misuse his legacy. Then she read the English version prepared for Adrian. The warning had been redirected toward Omar's own company. Nobody spoke. Maya pointed to another paragraph. Then another. Small changes. One adjective removed. One expression replaced. One respectful phrase turned into suspicion. None of them looked dramatic alone. Together, they completely transformed the conversation. Claire slowly lowered the tablet. These are not interpretation choices, she said quietly. These are content changes. Adrian's eyes never left Victor. Explain this. Victor remained composed, although the confidence in his voice had faded. Automatic translation software occasionally restructures expressions. Omar immediately responded from the screen. Those revisions are not produced by our software. We archive every translation exactly as it is generated. He shared another verification file containing timestamps from the conference server. Claire compared the records one final time before looking directly at Adrian. The original transcript arrived unchanged. The edited version was created afterward on this device. She gently turned Victor's tablet so Adrian could see the editing history displayed across the screen. A long silence settled over the room. Ethan slowly removed the untouched coffee service from the table without making a sound. No one noticed him anymore. Adrian finally spoke, his voice calm enough to make everyone listen even more carefully. Victor, he said, I trusted you with my company's words because words create decisions. Tonight, someone tried to create a decision using words that were never spoken. Victor opened his mouth to answer, but before he could say anything, Maya quietly noticed one final detail on the editing log. Every revision had been made almost 15 minutes before Omar had even spoken those sentences aloud, revealing that the altered translation had been prepared in advance rather than created during the meeting. The editing history remained on the screen like a quiet witness that no one could argue with. Adrian studied every timestamp without rushing, his expression steady, his breathing measured. Years of leading a global company had taught him that the loudest reaction was rarely the strongest one. He looked at Victor for a long moment before speaking. Please leave the meeting. There was no anger in his voice. There was only certainty. Victor glanced around the room as though searching for someone willing to defend him, but every face remained still. Claire closed her tablet and stepped aside, allowing one of the company's compliance officers, who had been observing remotely through the secure conference system, to begin documenting the records. Victor quietly gathered his belongings without another word. As the private dining room door closed behind him, the atmosphere changed almost instantly. It was as though a pressure no one had fully recognized had finally disappeared. Adrian turned toward the large display where Omar Haddad was still waiting. For the first time since the meeting had begun, Adrian spoke directly in simple Arabic. Please forgive the misunderstanding. His pronunciation was careful rather than perfect, but his sincerity needed no translation. Omar smiled warmly before answering in the same respectful tone. Maya translated only the few expressions Adrian could not fully understand. Within minutes, the conversation returned to the trust that had taken years to build. Omar explained several cultural references that had been misunderstood because of the altered transcript, and Adrian listened instead of interrupting. Questions replaced assumptions. Clarification replaced suspicion. By the time the discussion concluded, both companies agreed to continue the partnership exactly as originally planned, with independent language verification added to every future negotiation. The agreement was not saved by luck. It was saved because one person chose honesty over silence. After the video call ended, the room remained unexpectedly quiet. Adrian slowly stood and walked toward Maya. Ethan instinctively stepped forward, prepared to apologize for interrupting her earlier, but Adrian gently raised one hand. asking everyone to wait. He stopped a few feet from Maya, looking at her not as a waitress, not as an employee, but simply as another professional who had protected something valuable. "Miss Brooks," he said, "I owe you an apology." Maya looked slightly surprised but remained composed. Adrian continued, "I judged the room before I understood the people inside it. I almost walked away from a trusted partner because I never thought to question the voice I relied on. You gave me the opportunity to correct that mistake before it became permanent." Ethan lowered his eyes. Claire quietly nodded, recognizing that she had overlooked Maya for the same reason everyone else had. Adrian reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a leather checkbook. He paused for only a second before placing it back where it belonged. Money suddenly felt like the smallest thing he could offer. "What can I do to thank you?" he asked. Maya smiled gently. "You already have, sir." Adrian looked puzzled. "How?" Maya answered with the same quiet confidence that had carried her through the evening. "You listened before deciding who I was. That matters more than anything you could write on paper." No one spoke after that. The silence was no longer uncomfortable. It was thoughtful. In a room built for powerful negotiations, the most valuable lesson of the night had not been about contracts, markets, or billions of dollars. It had been about the difference between hearing a voice and truly listening to the person behind it. 3 months later, the elevators inside Khalil Meridian Group opened onto the executive floor overlooking Lower Manhattan, and Maya Brooks stepped forward wearing a navy business suit instead of a black restaurant uniform. The city beyond the glass walls looked exactly the way it had on the night everything changed, but she no longer entered the building carrying a coffee tray. She carried a notebook filled with research, translations, and ideas she had spent countless evenings preparing after finishing her shifts at the restaurant. Adrian Khalil had kept the promise he made that night, but not by offering favors. Instead, he insisted that Maya complete the same application process required of every candidate. She interviewed before an independent hiring committee. She completed language assessments, cultural communication exercises, and international business case studies. Every score stood on its own. Every recommendation was earned. When the committee reached its decision, Adrian did not cast a single vote. He simply accepted the result that every evaluator had already reached. Maya had earned her place. At the same time, Khalil Meridian introduced a new international communication policy requiring every critical negotiation involving multiple languages to receive independent cultural verification before major decisions were finalized. It slowed important meetings by only a few minutes, but it protected years of trust that could have been lost through misunderstanding. Omar Haddad often joked during later conferences that the company had finally learned that translation was not only about language. It was about responsibility. Professor Elias Rahman smiled when Maya called to tell him she had accepted the position. He reminded her of the lesson he had repeated since she was 12 years old. Words build bridges only when people choose to cross them with humility. Maya wrote those words inside the first page of every notebook she carried. Back at the Halston room, Ethan greeted every new employee differently than he once had. He no longer introduced people only by their positions. He asked about their goals, their education, and the dreams they carried outside their uniforms. Claire also changed. Before every major event, she personally thanked the hospitality staff by name, realizing that professionalism could exist anywhere, regardless of title or salary. One quiet afternoon, Adrian returned to the restaurant for lunch. There were no television cameras, no reporters, and no executives following behind him. He chose a simple table near the window where everything had begun. Maya happened to be visiting former co-workers during her lunch break. Adrian stood as she approached and smiled. "Congratulations, Miss Brooks," he said. "You earned every bit of this." Maya thanked him before looking around the familiar dining room. The polished tables, the warm lights, and the soft music had not changed. What had changed were the people inside. Adrian extended his hand, not as a billionaire greeting an employee, but as one professional acknowledging another. Maya accepted the handshake with quiet confidence. Neither of them spoke for several seconds because nothing more needed to be said. Sometimes the greatest victories arrive without applause. They arrive when respect quietly replaces assumption. On the night they first met, Adrian believed power meant being the first person to speak and the last person to leave. Maya taught him something far more valuable. Real leadership begins the moment pride becomes willing to listen. The room had not changed because someone spoke perfect Arabic. It changed because one overlooked voice refused to let the truth remain untranslated, proving that dignity never depends on a title, wisdom is never limited by a uniform, and the people the world notices last are sometimes the very ones who keep everyone else from making their greatest mistake.